It looks like what Apple recently launched for the metaverse, or Facebook or Apple, and it's
A
like
chunkier
when
version.
exactly it's much bigger, but it's to just give you the basic description to people thinking as to how what it looks like is yeah, it's basically what Facebook launched for the it looks like what Facebook launched for the metaverse, but the only difference is this is actually assessing your eyes, checking your eye health, and as you had, checking your retina, and that leads to many other diagnoses in terms of like how things can be seen. So that's quite interesting just to get the description. Welcome to today's episode of the MedTech 101 podcast. And today I've got an exciting company, but it's actually quite interesting because it's quite futuristic in terms of what they offer. And they're based out of Maryland in the US. And it's quite interesting because their approach to this way of looking at things in patients is quite different from what's been happening on the market. And today's company's JuneBrain CEO, Dr. Samantha Scott, is quite interesting, really, because she's a biomedical engineer just like me, but she went to university in Stanford, where she did her undergrad and then took like some sort of like overseas program in Oxford. So I'm quite curious to hear about that experience was. And afterwards, then she did a PhD at the University of Southern California, and then worked in research afterwards, like most biomedical engineers do. And then about 7 years ago, she started this company, JuneBrain. So yeah, welcome to the podcast, Dr.
Thank
Sam.
you. It's good to be here.
Thank you. I'm really honored to have you here today. And before we even get started, what I always try to do is to introduce people a little bit so they know your background, what like why I brought you on the podcast, and like what could you tell us briefly in terms of what your journey has been leading up to JuneBrain.
Yeah, sure. So it's you summed it up in a nutshell. But my PhD was in biomedical engineering. But even starting at Stanford, there was such a huge startup culture there. So I think I say I was raised in startup land, which is true, Silicon Valley. Um, so even back then, I always had this interest in starting a company one day out in the future. I didn't know what that company would look like or when it would be, but it was always somewhere at the back of my mind. Um, but very quickly, I went to Stanford wanting to do something related to medicine and design. So I fell naturally into biomechanical engineering. And then after that, went on to USC. So for that, I was in this pretty awesome lab where they focus on site restoration treatments. So it was a very industry focused lab, which was unique for academia. So I worked directly with a startup company called Second Sight Medical Products. They were developing this retinal prosthetic device for people with vision loss. And my research was around neuroimaging. So understanding what happens in the brain of someone who loses their vision, and then how does it change once they have some level of sight restoration. So it was always that eye brain connection. It's my happy place. So after then, I moved to DC. I got married, which was like the best part of all of it, but also did my postdoc at NIH. That was more neuroimaging with addiction, it was really fascinating. But after that, I actually wound up. I started getting sick when I was in grad school, um, and it was a interesting slash terrible experience from a health point of view. But it took me about 6 years to finally be diagnosed with myasthenia gravis. So that was around 2017, and that's also when I started JuneBrain. And it was in response to the significant challenge that I faced with uh, finding an objective way to understand what was going on with me, because it was clear it was something neurology related just based on my symptoms, but my doctors had such a hard time figuring out what was wrong. um, so JuneBrain, I built it in response to that. And again, I was diagnosed, and 6 years after that, my diagnosis was thrown out the window and replaced with something else. So it's still an ongoing journey. It
Yes.
just constantly reinforces the need for objective, accessible monitoring.
Well, that's really inspirational, I think, to a lot of people who are listening right now today. To think that not only did you go through all of this in university, because I'd like to think that maybe you might have had some of the symptoms earlier, but no one really knew what it was. They probably thought it's just you making up something. But when you then get diagnosed and you start thinking, okay, maybe this is the illness you have, and then all of a sudden they tell you no, that's the wrong diagnosis. Then you try to change this, and there's like an effect in pharmaceutical trials, etc. I think it's like a nocebo effect or something like that, where if they tell you got something and you believe it, you start thinking that, or maybe you might actually have that illness when you actually don't. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, like, just getting back to your story really, because I think it's quite interesting in terms of how you've managed to do it. But leading up to JuneBrain, and like now you, like, as I understand, like you guys have like done some seed raising, and I've seen your videos on YouTube in a couple of places talking. I think it was the MedTech Innovator as well, one of the related events.
Yes, yeah, we were in the MTI cohort last year, which is just a phenomenal program, but they gave us a lot of speaking opportunities.
Yes, no, that's really great, and I see like the company is kind of growing, and I was really quite motivated to see what you're doing. But what JuneBrain is really about, like the OCT, which is basically stands for Optical Coherence Tomography. Sorry,
Yeah,
like it's a bit of a tongue twister,
it
but
is.
in a summarized way, what exactly is it? How would you describe it to someone who's listening who doesn't have a, a medical or engineering background?
Yeah, yeah. So OCT is it's a non-invasive way of taking pictures of the back of your eye, and that the back of your eye is called the retina. It's a very thin layer of tissue, but it has a ton of layers on it. And what the retina does is take light or whatever you're looking at, and it processes that light information and then sends it to your brain so you understand what you're looking at. But the cool thing is that the retina is literally part of the brain. So it's layers of neurons. So when things happen in the brain, it often trickles to the retina. So with OCT, it's a tool that you can use not just to monitor eye disease, but also any other disease that may be happening in the brain, and actually systemically throughout the whole body.
Well, and just to add on to that, I don't know how true this is, but they say basically the eyes are basically an extension of the brain.
Yes,
So in the sense that the eyes are directly connected to the brain compared to
yes.
other organs in the body. So, and when you say you can monitor other illnesses in the brain, could you give us like an example? Because I didn't know that. I just thought OCT was just for checking people's vision, and I didn't know that it could have other applications.
Sure, sure, of course. So the most obvious are retinal diseases like macular degeneration is often assessed using OCT. But on the neuro side, in JuneBrain, we are heavily focused on neurology. Multiple sclerosis, for example, changes in disease with people in MS, you can often see changes in the eye that are related to it. Um, Other diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, there's a ton of research going on now trying to understand how you can use the retina as a biomarker or even an early screening tool for some of those diseases too. I believe there was a pretty awesome paper that came out for Parkinson's, and it shared that they identified changes in the eye 7 years before the onset of symptoms in people with Parkinson's.
Well, that's just mind blowing because I didn't know it was that deep, and usually I don't get surprised on the podcast because I would have done enough research before. But this has come across as like hearing this for the first time, and I'm really stunned to hear that. And what I'll also be doing after this is I'll be asking you to send me the link to that paper. I'll be putting it
Yes,
as well
I
in the description below for people to also read this. I'll be reading it to see, because I always like to try to stay like basically on trend with what's happening in the medtech industry. And like you said, quite a lot of things there, which I think is quite really remarkable in terms of its potential and everything. And it, I think maybe perhaps this leads on to the next question as to why do you think June's Brain's approach should be accessible to more people? Because I mean, not just only covering different kinds of illnesses, etc., but is there any other additional factors and reasons as to why people must have June's Brain like somewhere close to them?
Yes. Yeah, so there's already companies that make OCT and they do it really well. These are super high quality image devices, but the challenges that we've heard from providers and patients, and that's one thing about our company, we've been very focused on developing based on what our customers tell us they need. And what we hear from neurologists, for example, is that they they think OCT is a very valuable tool, but it's too expensive. The devices are very heavy, and they require a lot of real estate in the clinic. So a neurology clinic may not have extra space to put the machine. And then you have to hire a trained technician who can operate the device. Um, so, as a result of this, you typically see OCT machines in ophthalmology clinics or specialty eye clinics, and it means that it's really hard to put them in places like a neurology clinic or even your local diagnostic lab or pharmacy or a grocery store that has a pharmacy or eye optometry office inside of it, like Walmart Vision Centers. So that's one of the main challenges that we've tackled within my own team. So, developing a device that is affordable outside of these specialty clinics, one that's portable, has a very small footprint, so it can be moved around a clinic wherever space is available, and it's self use, so a patient can use it on their own, or someone on the staff can use it to help the patient without heavy duty training.
Well, so now that's really great because for me personally, I think just to add on to basically break it down further for the audience in terms of what you're saying, is that me personally growing up like in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, I told you earlier before this call that I'm in South Africa at the moment, where we have also like the less infrastructure a device needs, the more accessible it is to people because anyone can
Yes.
set it up, whether it's a remote location or whether it's in a metropolitan city. Regardless, it's something that can be easily accessible in that sense, and that's really great, really, because not only are you saying, okay, we're trying to make the equipment less bulky, make it lighter, easier to use, less infrastructure required to use it, you're basically challenging all those traditional issues that have come with that. And then the next question people might have, as much as you're challenging this, would be, are the results similar to the usual chunky device? Because then they'll be like, okay, cool, we're reducing the size of it from a chunky one, but can we trust the results? And what do you have to say to those people?
Yes, the answer is yes. So, and specifically for neurology, you have to have high quality images because the changes you're looking at are from one layer at a time. It's on a micron level changes. So, yes, we have a very high performance, ultra high speed, and high quality device. The images are very high quality. Um, and for us, it's important because accessibility means that you can have early screening for anybody. Everyone needs to be able to take advantage of these advanced, super advanced, sometimes Star Trekky like technologies. um, so, yeah, we don't want to
Nice.
compromise on performance.
Nice. And just to quickly also describe what it looks like what Apple recently launched for the metaverse, or Facebook or Apple. And it's
A
like
chunkier
when
version.
exactly. It's much bigger, but it's to just give you the basic description to people thinking as to how what it looks like is yeah, it's basically what Facebook launched for it looks like what Facebook launched for the metaverse, but the only difference is this is actually assessing your eyes, checking your eye health, and as you had, checking your retina, and that leads to many other diagnoses in terms of like how things can be seen. So that's quite interesting just to get the description out there. But in terms of like accessibility of this device at the moment, would you say that it's do you guys have like FDA approval only, or are you in Europe now? Which markets are you guys targeting at the moment?
So we're still pre FD clearance, pre approval. So right now, we have a pipeline of customers. So it includes researchers who want to use the device uh, to, you know, better diversify their clinical studies, being able to reach participants that typically have a hard time getting to research sites. Um, but also clinics who would like to have an additional OCT device, or want their first one, so like a lot of neurology clinics again. But we haven't sold to any of them yet. We're still pre-sale, pre-revenue, pre-approval. Um, but right now we're focused on clinical studies. So our device right now is in a neurorehabilitation clinic, for example. Um, we've been testing with people who have MS and getting a ton of feedback from them, which is very helpful.
Nice. And just to add on, leading up on that, like which clinical phase would you say are you guys in at the moment?
So we have an MVP completed. I'd say we're one step away from our design freeze and pivotal testing, which is all required for us to go through the FDA process.
Yes, nice. And just to get this correct as well, is that to break it down for people, because some people might not understand what phases might be. It's basically in medical devices, you basically have essentially three human phases, and what sometimes
Ah,
like in the university we call it, like phase zero. So phase zero is like animal models, animal studies, and then phase one you try it in a small population of people, you test the device, and then you go to a bigger population of people in phase three, so in phase two, and in phase three, you basically it's much bigger, comparing it to other existing products on the market to see if it's safe, good, and actually maybe adding any additional value compared to what's already existing. So that's how phases work for medical devices from a layman point of view.
I will
Yes.
say though, so we're going through the 510K pathway,
Oh,
which
nice.
doesn't have those phases. It's really nice. So
Yes.
it's mhm.
The 510K is basically like a fast track to market, because
Yeah.
the 510K works, let's say for instance in the US, if you have a device that's slightly similar on the market, then you can say that this device is similar to this and this, but we improving on that, and then working off the back of those other devices that have already been approved that are similar to that, then you get market access, and this will kind of speed up the process. It cuts it from maybe 10 years to maybe 5 years, which makes a huge difference.
It
uh,
does, especially when you
yes.
have limited funding.
Oh yeah, definitely. And yeah, in talking about funding actually, because I saw you did like a seed round. Like how many seed rounds have you guys done? And what are you guys using the funds for besides clinical trials and stuff? Like what future like aspirations do you have for JuneSpray?
Yeah, so I'd say about 60% of our funding has come from grants, so like phase one and phase two SBIR awards. On the investment side, we had a pre seed round, and then we just closed our seed round. So it's two rounds. The first one was more of a rolling round, which was very helpful. Uh, but use of funds. So our goal is to go to market next year. So these funds will be used to build out initial devices for our first customers, and they can buy our device for investigational use only, so we can sell to them before we have clearance. It will also be used to finish up testing that's needed for our 510K submission, um, and also begin building out infrastructure that's needed to scale up so we can start selling to all the customers in our pipeline, which is the exciting part.
Yes, of
But
course.
yeah,
And I think for medical devices, it takes so long to get to market, that by the time you get to market, you're just really happy to be on market, and it's just
yes,
a matter of expanding in terms of where you're reaching out and everything. But like you mentioned one thing which I think is quite interesting, that you mentioned. You say 60% of your funding is coming from grants. Grants are usually like government funds, etc. and that the 40% maybe might have to pitch to venture capitalists and private investors, angel investors, etc. Like, because like, and this question I'm just really asking you because like I have, well, the majority of my like podcast listeners actually on Spotify, about 60% are female.
Oh,
So like, just which is quite interesting, really. Like, I like, shout out to everyone. Thank you for the support.
yes.
But like, how would you say that you like raising capital has been for you? Because I know some companies, particularly female co-founded companies, have some challenges raising funds and etc. And but for you, you've been able to do it. So I'm just wondering if you could tell like the people listening how you've been able to do that, especially coming from an engineering background, because maybe you had to learn new financial jargons,
Yeah,
etc.
sure.
How has that been for you?
So yes, it was a learning curve. It was definitely a learning curve. I'd say grants were the easiest, e- in air quotes, the easiest to transition into because I was coming from academia, so that's a grant writing world. Um, But when it came to fundraising, so for me, the first thing I knew about myself is that I did not have a very big network when it came to the business world, the VC world, anything related to fundraising. So one of the first things I did was join incubators, accelerator programs, and they actually served as the first source of dilutive funding for us. Um, and the nice thing for them, especially when you're in very early stages of your startup, they provide not just funding but also resources. So if you have like a knowledge gap on your team, they'll put mentors with you, advisors, or even part-time expertise. So that was great. But I think it was really through all of these programs that we've participated in that we grew our network to include the investors who came along later on. So one of our very first investor came from the very first incubator program I was a part of. He was one of our mentors, and he later became our first angel investor. And from him, he introduced us to, I would say, 30% of our current investors came from him. Um, so warm intros from one investor to the next has been golden, very helpful, much better than cold emailing every time. Uh, but yes, it was a learning curve.
No, I'm really happy to hear that. I'm sure a lot of people will be happy to hear that too, because I think that's been one of the most challenging parts of trying to start a meta company. The All the investing you need, all the capital you need prior to market approval is a
Yeah,
lot. So by the time you get to market, you're just relieved to be there, as I mentioned earlier, and that will send a lot of words of encouragement. But before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you one more thing as well, in terms of like your thoughts in terms of on the future of OCT. Like, what does it mean to us? I mean, I mean, you already said this could be used to see symptoms 7 years earlier for like Parkinson's, etc. Which I didn't even know that. But the future, like, what's in store for us in the future?
yeah. I think the future, healthcare in general, but that includes the OCT industry. I think it's trending towards accessibility and even like a more holistic view of a human, of a person. Because even
Yes.
today with healthcare, and it's both a good thing and a challenge that I faced with my own health challenges. Uh, Specialties are specialized. So generally, experts look at one system at a time. But what we're finding, it's your whole person. All of your systems interact with one another. So with the future of OCT, I think making it more accessible, putting it in places where anyone can have access to it. At the end of grocery shopping, for example, or even when you're visiting a neurologist, you can also have an eye scan done. These things will open up one big data. So now you have a ton of data coming in from people relevant to their eyes, and then you have all the brain power of research to take that data and mine for new biomarkers, understand how you can use that data to early screening for a even greater range of disease. Um, And then, back to the holistic view, if you take that data and you combine it with data that's already available for the patient, so anything from their other doctors, if you can find a way to put that into one place, then you really are generating a full view of a person, of their health, their risk profile for disease, or how their current disease is progressing, how they're responding to treatments. Um,
Nice.
Accessibility. Yeah, it's
Wow,
huge.
wow,
It's really
that's it
important.
is, it is, it is, and actually quite impressed, really, to be honest with you, because not only are we moving in that direction, but this also touches a lot on another point, which I actually didn't mention, telemedicine, which is also starting to be a growing
Yeah,
industry, and telemedicine is basically like being like having like a consultation with your doctor remotely, sending
yeah,
things, whether it's your symptoms, and your doctor can monitor them remotely. So it means that people don't have to queue up in hospitals. It frees
yeah.
up the systems. And in countries like the UK, because I was living in the UK for about 7 years, until recently when I moved to Malta, but right now I'm in South Africa.
Mm.
But
Oh,
at the moment, yeah, it's the NHS in the UK, for instance, is heavily clogged with long waiting times, because everything is government funded. So it means that there needs to be efficiency in the system, and basically what JuneBrain is doing is adding to that efficiency, which makes it
yeah,
quite nice. And just
yeah.
out of curiosity, just one last question, because this is quite exciting. Do you know how much it might roughly cost when it gets to markets, and what like is of course maybe the price will change, but I'm sure maybe you have an idea in your mind as to how much people should be expecting. Or if you're still calculating it and it's not released yet, it's okay. You didn't have to tell us, but I'm kind of curious as to how much it will be.
Yeah, it's not released yet, but it is
Yeah.
going to be a fraction of the cost of devices, newer devices that match our performance. But also, we've developed a model that is also accessible. So cost is a barrier to putting this device in more accessible places. So just having a model that suits neurologists, for example, or uh, locations that aren't used to purchasing heavy duty medical device equipment. So that's something that we've worked a lot on. I did also want to add just one more
Yes.
soapbox
Of
moment.
course. Of course.
uh,
Definitely. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, you touched on accessibility in terms of timing. That is such, it's another huge thing. And even the doctors we talk to, it's one of their main pain points is that they can't see their patients as often as they need to or would like to assess them and understand what's going on a more dynamic basis. But I think it also removes a level of bias that's also in our system. So when you have objective data coming from a person, now you have something that can help anchor what the patient is self reporting to their doctor, or choosing not to self report. So even patients introduce bias. So for me, for example, early on, I realized that the more symptoms I laid out, the more likely I was to be sent to a therapist than to another specialist to figure out what was going on. So I started filtering myself, when in the end it turned out that all of those symptoms were related to one thing that was it was all critical to a correct diagnosis. So now I've been diagnosed with POTS. Um, so everything was relevant. But when you have objective data, it helps in the cases of patients not reporting everything, or even on the provider side, each doctor has a different interpretation of what the patient is telling them. And and they're doing it to the best of their abilities, but objective data helps so much. It evens the playing field, no matter who you are, where you're from, how you self report or share or don't share. It's just important.
Nice. It's like it's like an egalitarian. I think the word just slips my mind.
Yeah,
Egalitarian approach, which I think is quite great, and yeah, that's really impressive, really. And I hope that you feel better now that you got the correct
yeah.
diagnostic and stuff. And I didn't even know about POTS. Like in terms of what exactly is POTS. I mean, for
Yeah,
people just
I've been
listening,
learning
what's
too.
yeah, I'll put some links below, but I don't know what could you
Oh,
say like in
sure.
a few words. Yeah.
Sure. So it's interesting. A lot of the symptoms of POTS mimics myasthenia gravis, and even the medication is slightly the same. So it made sense that it helped uh, before, but it's an autonomic disorder, which means that your sympathetic, parasympathetic systems are not working correctly, and for POTS patients, it results in either super high blood pressure or, in my case, super low blood pressure. So you faint. It can do everything from affecting your mobility, so severe weakness. It can affect your breathing, your vision. So for me, I have vision problems, hearing problems. It's just a whole. It's a holistic issue. Um, I'm still learning about it.
Thank you very much. You've actually brought it to an increased awareness because, to be honest, I didn't know much about it myself, and now I'm actually going to be aware. Or go read about it. It basically increasing the awareness of people out there because I'm sure there's people out there who are having these symptoms and they feel tired, they feel everything, and people would just probably say, "No, you're just lazy," but you're actually not lazy. You probably need to get the correct medication.
Yes,
Exactly.
quick treatment.
So no, but no, thank you very much, Dr. Sam, for coming on the podcast. I mean, it's been a great honor, and I don't know where can people reach you. Are you attending any conferences, or are you planning to? But obviously, I'm going to add the links below for your LinkedIn and JuneBrain's website. But where are you going to be in the next coming year?
Oh, we are planning on attending AAO, so that's the American Academy of Ophthalmologists conference in October, I believe. We're also striving to attend ECTRIMS and ACTRIMS coming up. Those are the major MS conferences. Um,
Nice, nice.
but through our website, everyone can reach our team
Great.
through our website. We actually
Wow.
respond.
Perfect, guys. So there you have it. And thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.